Perfect. So let me just introduce you. So this is, Joe's our, national president, so he's very accomplished. Bear with me for a moment. So Joe received a bachelor's of engineering degree in civil engineering with a specialization in construction management and a master of engineering degree in structural engineering, both from Stevens Institute of Technology. Joe is a licensed professional engineer in 28 states and is certified by the Structural Engineering Certification Board. Joe is a member of ASCE, ACI, AISC, and SEI. Joe is a fellow of the Structural Engineering Institute of the ASCE and a fellow of the American Society of Civil Engineers, and is past chair of the SEI Business Practices Committee and SEI Business and Professional Activities Division Executive Committee, as well as a member of the SEI Board of Governors and SEI 2020 to 2021 SEI President. So his term goes from October through, starts this month and then goes through next year.
This is my second week, so
yes.
Gotta go easy on me.
In addition to his professional activities, Joe is on the Board of Trustees of Stevens Institute of Technology, chairs the Mountain Lakes Economic Development Committee, as well as the Buildings and Grounds Committee of the Lakeland Hills Family YMCA. He has also served as president of the Stevens Institute of Technology Alumni Association and on the Board of Governors of the Mountain Lakes Club. Joe serves as president of Structural Workshop LLC, which was founded in February of 2004. Structural Workshop LLC provides a variety of engineering services, including structural analysis, inspection and design of commercial, residential, retail, industrial, foundation, and earth retaining structures, forensic engineering, commercial building inspections, due diligence inspections, building consulting services, project and facilities management services. Joe has extensive experience in all aspects of engineering, analysis, inspection, and design of a large variety of types of structures and materials. His interests include forensic engineering, unique solutions to unique and difficult structural problems, innovation in the business of engineering, teaching and writing, and making structural engineering understandable and accessible to the general public. So at this time, what I can do is I'll stop sharing, and then if you want to pull up that one presentation. There, Joe.
You want me to? I'll do the slides. Okay, no problem.
I mean, I have it, but I thought it'd just be easier if you.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, no, it definitely will be. Give me 1 second, okay?
Yep. Yeah, no problem.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
And again, if you have any questions for him, this first half hour is more or less, open-ended. So if you have any questions for him, put them in the chat box.
All right. We are gonna start the slideshow on my end. Okay, it is on my screen. What do you need me to do to?
So at the bottom, there should be a share screen option for you, hopefully.
Hold on, I've got. Okay. I need to get back to my Zoom. Hold on, I've got. Okay, there we go. Give me 1 second. I'll have this up and running.
No rush.
So there we go. That should do it.
Yes.
Got it?
We see it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me. I originally had this scheduled as in person, and it was going to be my first event of many as SEI president, but 2020 happened, and we're doing it remotely like everything else. But I'm glad it's going forward, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me. I want to talk a little bit about SEI and some of the initiatives we're working on and some of the things that I want to accomplish in my term. And, then we have a presentation on some of my experiences after Sandy. I originally did that about 6 years ago for the Colorado chapter of NCSEA. And some of the stuff in the beginning we might breeze through because most of you guys probably experienced Sandy to one degree or another. Not quite as bad as we had it in New Jersey, but it wasn't a foreign thing to you. So I don't necessarily have to go through all the details of the power and gas and issues we had here. So we might go a little lighter on that. We'll see. But I updated the presentation as best as I can, and there is some very good photos of damage, and we can talk a little bit about why it happened and some of the changes to codes and our knowledge about flood damage and protection against flood damage. Let me hold on. I got to get to one more screen here to go through the slides. There we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is the vision for the future of structural engineering. This was adopted last year, early 2019, by CASE, NCSEA, and SEI. And this is basically a joint document by the three organizations that are involved in structural engineering. Are any of you guys involved with CASE or NCSEA or just SEI, or?
I would say probably mostly SEI,
Okay.
but I'm not sure anybody else.
Okay. So this is really the profession as a whole coming together and agreeing on what the vision for the future of the profession is. We'll talk about this a little bit more as we go through the slides. So I guess the important part is this top box where we are united in envisioning a future where as stewards of the built environment, structural engineers are widely recognized as making key contributions to the advancement of society on a national and global scale. And if you look at the bottom, some of these things are what I'm going to talk about in a little bit, about engineers using their unique problem-solving skills to not only improve society through their work, but also getting involved in things outside of engineering and using our skills, which are unique. We spend countless hours in college doing nothing but solving problems, and a lot of that stuff you say I'm never going to use, but when you spend 4, 5, 6 years doing nothing but solving problems, your brain becomes trained to do nothing but look at everything as a problem to be solved and find a way to do it. And we really need to get out there and let people that are not in the engineering profession know that we have this skill set, and we can join boards and get involved in our communities and use these skills to help society and solve problems. So here are some of the initiatives, and we'll go through each of these, but I'll highlight some of the ones that I want to focus on. Support of performance-based codes and standards. This is on the technical side of things at SEI. This is the future. This is where everything is going. There's some pre-standards being published as we speak. That's actually the next slide, so we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. address the needs and concerns of structural engineers worldwide, support collaboration with peer professional organizations, promote the structural engineer as a leader and innovator. That's kind of what I just touched on, and definitely going to be one of the things I focus on. Reform structural engineering education, enhance professional development of practicing engineers, improve mentoring of young structural engineers. This is something we've had some issues getting a lot of traction on. Everybody agrees it's a good idea, and everyone agrees that senior level experienced engineers should help out younger people, and it benefits both of them. But implementing it has been a little bit harder than anticipated. I don't know if you guys in your chapter have any sort of informal or formal mentoring programs set up, but that's something we're looking for, anything that's going to get that moving nationally better than it has. So if you guys have any ideas, we're open ears. Lead technical summits, advocate for SE licensure. This is somewhat of a hot topic. In general, the profession feels we need to elevate our licensure standards as a way to elevate the profession as a whole. But there's a lot of disagreement on how best to do that and what's going to work and what's not. There have been efforts at this before that have not gotten a lot of traction, and the fear is we don't want to push for something again that's not going to get any traction. So while we generally support increased standards and licensure for structural engineers, the community as a whole has not been able to come up with a united way to do that. So that's something that is currently a hot topic. Resilience and sustainability in all structures. This is another hot topic. I think we have a slide on that coming up. And diversity and inclusion. I mean, this is a hot topic in society as a whole, but it hasn't escaped the structural engineering world. And there's a lot of passionate younger people who are working on this. Historically, this has been a very male-dominated profession. I think the barriers to women in the profession are not nearly what they were. But since it's historically been so heavily male, it's going to take some time. And there certainly is a lack of certain minority groups that are practicing structural engineers. So that's another thing that these people are working on. So performance-based design, this is the WIN standard, which is available now. This you can get on the, this is available for free on the ASCE library. If you guys log into your ASCE account and go to the ASCE library, you can download this. This is not, no code adoption or anything like that yet, but this is the standard that was developed and will potentially be the first actual code adopted performance-based design standard. This was done with ASCE, SEI, and the Charles Pankow Foundation. And there is a structural fire protection pre-standard that just came out. You can also get from the ASCE library. And there's also some presentations on the SEI YouTube channel, one from Don Dusenberry at the Structures Congress virtual event, and one from Kevin LaMalva on the structural fire protection pre-standard. So here's two other initiatives, and these are the websites. The one on the top is Cross US. This is not to be confused with Cross E, which is the Committee for the Reform of Structural Engineering Education. Cross US is confidential reporting on structural safety. Nobody did an acronym check on those two to realize how similar they were and how easy it is to confuse them. Which brings up, I'm just going to take a quick aside. One of the other things that we are working on at SEI, and is going to take up a good chunk of my time as my term is looking at reorganizing our structure a little bit. I mean, it's 20 years ago, SEI was founded. We put a committee structure in place that made sense at the time, and we've done nothing but add to it as new things have been needed. So some of the other institutes of ASCE have already done this, kind of go through and say, hey, if we were to start this ground up today, how would we structure it and what do we need? So we have a committee that's just kind of looking at that, and it's going to report to the SEI Board of Governors. And we're looking to maybe just simplify and streamline a little bit the way we operate. This has nothing to do with cutting anything, because the genesis of this was in December, January, long before any COVID or budgetary questions or anything like that. The genesis is just to be less bloated, do a better job. So across US, this is something that Glenn Bell, who is the past president of SEI, really championed and is going to continue to champion. And this was originally done in the UK by iStructD, which is the structural engineers group in the United Kingdom. And this is a website where you can put confidential reports of failures or near misses, and anyone can access it. So it becomes basically a database for doing research on things that went wrong and learning from them so we can improve safety going forward. This is the US version of it, which is now live. You guys can check it out, and you can submit stuff, you can read stuff, and it's going international. A lot of different countries are going to be on this system, so we can gather worldwide data for things that go wrong, so we can learn from them so they don't happen again. SE 2050 is a separate from SEI, but I need to be a little careful here because this is a bit of a hot button issue, but SEI has kind of endorsed the vision that we are supporting the efforts of SE 2050. They are a very passionate group regarding climate change and carbon, and they want structural engineers to be involved in reducing the carbon footprint of buildings when they're built and as they operate, which that alone, I don't think anyone has any issues with, but obviously this can start venturing very easy into politics, and politics are a mess these days. So, you know, the SEI board has kind of said we support what you're doing, and you know, we agree that this is something that needs to be addressed, but has really not wanted to go any further than that at this point. So, but these guys are extremely passionate and they're working really hard, and I think there's a lot of good that's going to come out of it. I just don't think it's going to be a straight line to get there. Lastly, the Futures Fund, you guys can always check out. This is a fund that originally this used to be called something else, and it was like an endowed kind of fund, but the past several years we've had the Futures Fund, and it's just money comes in and grants go out. There's no you know, invested or endowed funds, but this last year funded that SE 2050 website, and basically grants to groups or people who are doing things that are on the cutting edge or the future of the profession. So you can always check out the ASCE, or it's SEI Futures Fund. And that's it for SEI. You guys want to discuss anything or talk about anything before we move on to the?
So, I mean, we have 15 minutes. I'm gonna.
There is some chat here. Just go ahead and talk, but I just got back to the chat here. Hold on one second.
Oh, okay. If there's chat, that's great. If honestly, I feel inclined to let people unmute themselves and ask questions directly, just to kind of make this a little more lively. So if anybody wants
This
to
is
do
actually just a suggestion from someone about mentoring, which thank you, Amelia. This is helpful.
what
Yeah,
did
if
she
you
say?
guys any questions or anything you want to talk about, you can either ask on chat or just unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, we'll.
So that chat seems like she may have sent that to you privately.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. If you wanted to share it, I don't know if you want to share it.
Yeah, it's just a mentoring suggestion she had for
Oh, okay.
something they do at RPI that might, be able to be expanded.
Okay. Yeah. That's definitely something we, I mean, I brought it up at one of the meetings. It may be something we might want to look into a bit more is, get into more mentoring. And that could, because we, like many chapters, have problems with, getting people to attend every month to meetings and things like that. So, having a mentor program and getting more involved with the local student chapter could, get more involvement and, build on the relationship between local engineers and things like that. So
What universities other than RPI have engineering programs up there?
So in our actual region, in our actual chapter, you have, just RPI. West Point, I think, is technically in our, they're technically in our chapter, but they're so far, we're more congregated in the Albany area, most of our membership. There are many of them. I mean, many of our membership is further down towards the New York City area, and that's kind of where the southern boundary of our chapter is. And that's another. Ricardo is on the call today, and he's from down that area. So we may try to build on relationships like that. Our membership down there, or maybe we could expand on that and get involved with West Point. Who knows? But those are the two.
The other Albany colleges have engineering.
When it comes to civil engineering, I'm sorry, Hudson Valley. There's a community college that also has it as well.
But Albany, Siena, none of those.
In terms of civil engineering itself, no. It's just RPI, Hudson Valley Community College, and West Point.
Okay.
I think
Union had one of the oldest in the country, and they, in their infinite wisdom, got rid of it. I hear it's coming back. That's not going to happen.
That's in your your chapter
Schenectady.
range.
Yep.
Yeah, that's in Schenectady.
Right in their backyard.
Okay.
I mean, other engineering universities that are near here, I'm not sure if they're within the section, would be Clarkson and the other one's escaping me now.
What about Marist? Do they have a?
I believe they're out of our section. I believe they're too far south.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Oh,
Joe, I went to Manhattan College. It's a little out of the region too, but I'm looking forward to the Sandy presentation. I was in college actually down there when it hit, so it was an interesting time down there. But
yeah, it was. That's a light way of putting it.
yeah.
So if okay, so Amelia she put that in the chat. So anybody that wants to read the one comment she made, she put it in the chat to everybody, so you can read that. So if nobody else has any questions, whether it's in the chat box or aloud, we can get right into the presentation. And if we end a little bit early, that's fine too.
Yeah, there might be a lot more discussion on that one. So
yeah.
Hey guys, Larry Palesci.
Yeah, go for it, Larry.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for coming out and speaking with us. We really appreciate it. It was interesting, the litany of things that SEI is putting together as far as direction in the profession in the future. My question is, did anybody bother to ask the rank and file to rate those, I don't know, 12 different items as far as what's most important, what's least important? Because there are a number of things in there I find to be very important, and there's a number of things in there I really don't find to be all that important to the profession. So I think somehow you got to have rated responses back from the rank and file rather than just a list of good ideas.
That's a fair point. I don't believe that anyone did that, but I was not heavily involved in the development of it. But I can certainly take that back as a suggestion and see if anyone would be interested in sending out a survey or something like that.
Well, one of the biggest talks that we have is, sometimes engineers and their personalities, they're not really outgoing people, to say the least, and
Correct.
they expect them to be leaders in society, or even wanting to be leaders in society, may be something that's, how would you put it, a narrow vision from certain people, not necessarily across the board.
Oh, correct. I think we're looking for the people who both have that skill set and want to do it. Obviously, if that's 10 to 20% of practicing structural engineers, I think we would be doing very, very well. Because you're absolutely correct. Most engineers are relatively introverted. It just goes along with our math brains, right? So
I appreciate you speaking with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay.
You want me to start the next one, Phil? Or?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can. If you guys think of any further questions, whether it be for the presentation that he's about to give or any SEI questions in general, feel free to put it in the chat box and we can talk about it at the end. That's fine. Okay, so let me just introduce your presentation here. I'll give a blurb on it. And then while you're doing that, if you want to
I'll get it going, yeah.
Sure. So our third presentation today is titled Living and Working Through Superstorm Sandy. Joe will discuss his perspectives on living through the storm event and the following days, as well as his involvement in the recovery and rebuilding effort. He will present and discuss photos of the types of structural damage that occurred, the steps taken to address damage in the aftermath, and lessons learned on how to better guard against and prepare for similar storm events.
Okay. Give me 1 sec and we'll get that one going. Let me know when you guys see it.
Yep, I can see it.
All right. Well, as I said, this originally was developed for a presentation I did in Colorado about 6 years ago, and this was all foreign to them. So there's some stuff in here we might skip over or glance over, only because I think most of you guys to some degree know what happened here and know how bad it was. But I felt I had a very unique story to tell. I live in North Jersey, and we got destroyed here with power outages and everything else that happened. I have always spent half of my summers down the shore and have houses and rentals down the shore, and had to deal with that. And then as an engineer, I got to see a lot of this stuff up close, and before some of these areas were open up to the public, and see some of the damage, and then got to participate in some of the recovery. So I have a lot of different hats that I experienced this through. And I just thought there was a lot of perspective and stories to tell there. So that's kind of the genesis for why I put this together initially. Second. Okay. Probably should have had this slide up while I was talking, but this is what I just said. Yeah, I'm a lifelong resident of northern New Jersey. Other than my my time in Hoboken for college, grad school, and a little bit after, I've been in Marsh County my whole life, about 30 miles due west of Times Square, for those of you that are not familiar. When I was younger, my family had a house in Lavalette, and they sold that at one point in time, but we vacationed in between, and then my wife and I have a place in a rental unit in Ortley Beach, which we're gonna talk about Ortley Beach a lot because it was one of the hardest hit towns on the whole coast. And once again, thank you guys for having me. All right, here is just a little bit of geography for some of the places that we're going to talk about. Landfall was Little Lake Harbor, just north of Atlantic City. And actually there was really not a lot of damage there and not a lot of damage south of there because the storm was rotating to the right. So basically you had, for lack of a better term, you had suction away from the land south of the eye of the storm. And you know, all the water and wind was blowing in north of the storm. Lavalette and Ortley Beach are right next to each other, just north of Seaside Heights here. And there's a couple of examples there. Bayhead is a little further north of there. And then Rahway is inland, but there was some river flooding there, which is what we're gonna talk about. I'm sorry, I should have muted some of these things. Give me 1 second so I don't get interrupted again. All right. Caesars Bay is a shopping center. You guys may have seen this. If you come over the Verrazano Bridge into Brooklyn, it's only 2-3 miles on your right, but you can see it from the bridge. It's a Kohl's and a couple of different, but it's on the water. You'll see in the pictures what the issue was, but it's literally on the water and out over the water. And Mountain Lakes is where my office is and where I live, which is inland. This is just a little blow up of Monmouth and Ocean counties. Ortley Beach is right here between Lavalette and Seaside Heights. It's actually part of Tom's River, which is inland, and Ortley Beach is the beach part of it. All right, so a little background, and this is something you guys probably remember. We had Hurricane Irene, August 28, 2011. There were dire warnings before Hurricane Irene about how bad it was going to be. In the end, there was really no major damage at the coast at all, but there was significant inland flooding. It was a massive rain event inland. We had power outages, flooding, a lot of river flooding in northern New Jersey, and nobody could get any generators. Power was out a few days to a week, and everybody thought that that was terrible, and it was really just kind of like the warm-up. Then on October 31st, yeah, October 31st, 2011, we had a early snowstorm of heavy wet snow while the leaves were still on the trees. This caused even worse than Irene tree damage. The heavy wet snow on the leaves bent and broke a massive amount of trees and caused massive power outages. And again, nobody was able to get generators. At this point, I actually was able to get a power inverter at a Pet Boys because nobody was thinking that you know, something like that was doable. Everybody was going to Home Depot and other places for generators, and they were completely sold out. But I we had a power inverter at an auto parts store that actually worked pretty well. I had to hook it up to the car battery and run the car. That was my generator engine. But that helped us get through that. We lost all the food in the house, but we learned some lessons and we were ready to go for the next one. So from those events, we learned how important it is to have the cars gassed up, have spare gas, have a generator or power inverter or something, batteries, flashlights. Two things that we made sure we ran off of that power inverter was we'd run the fridge and freezer every once in a while and sump pumps as it filled up. And then Sandy was approaching. You guys probably remember some of this, but there was I think the public officials did an excellent job of warning the residents. I mean, at the time, our governor was Chris Christie, and he was, saying things like "get the hell off the beach," and you remember his style of governing, and they did a very good job, but the people had a little fatigue from the alarms of the prior years that did not materialize. So I think as it got really close, people realized that this was going to be a big one and did get the hell off the beach. But the week or two leading up to this, when they were predicting it, people were not paying much attention to it because we had been through dire warnings that turned into nothing. So we cleaned the house, charged the batteries, phones, etc. Took the power inverter ready to go. We slept in the one room of the house that I calculated the trees couldn't reach when they fell on the house. And luckily that did not become an issue. Although we did lose one tree during Irene, apple tree in my front yard. The tail end of the storm, we got through unscathed. A little gust of wind comes along like the last hour of the storm and the tree gently fell over on my lawn. So storm made landfall. Cable was the first thing to go out. I was able to pick up News 12, New Jersey, streaming on my laptop with a wireless card because I had no internet and no cable. That lasted about 2 hours. They actually had some cams on some places down the shore, which was actually pretty cool to watch as the storm was coming in, but eventually the cameras got knocked out. So all the cell service went to roaming. There was no broadband access. And then all night there was just howling winds. The next day we had limited cell service. Nobody had power. Friends, family, everyone that we could reach, nobody had power. And that was very different from the prior events. The prior events, some people had power. You could always find someone or go somewhere. This was nothing. All businesses were closed. We couldn't get any information. We actually dug out an old radio and tuned into some AM radio stations. Was pretty much the only way we had to connect with the outside world. Kept the fridge going and cooked on the grill outside and was able to save most of our food this time. And really couldn't go anywhere either because there were so many trees down that most roads were impassable. So we engineered as much as we could. I got basically a rabbit ear antenna and ran the TV on the rabbit ears and the power inverter. Had about 2 channels, maybe 3. But we started to see some images and started to understand what was going on. But nobody had power and there started to be gas shortages because everyone was running generators and they all needed fuel. People were siphoning gas out of people's cars in the middle of the night. It became a little borderline anarchy. The gas stations lost power. Their distribution network was shut down and there were miles long lines at the gas stations. So they started with odd even and some other restrictions. Businesses were closed. There was no emails coming in, no phone calls. I did have a client in St. Louis that got me on my cell phone regarding the Caesars Bay project. No mail. We got as a business owner, we were not getting any payments in, so that was obviously a problem. But there was also no banking, so we had no access to money, but really didn't have to pay any bills at the immediate moment. So there were some restaurants and things that somehow managed to open, but they had no power. So a lot of them were taking credit card numbers and writing them down with the promise that they, you know, it was a valid number and they charge it at some point when they could. So my first day out was a couple days after. That was the first day that they opened the New York City bridges back up. I drove from my house to Brooklyn and maybe saw 4 cars the whole way. And this was Caesars Bay Shopping Center. So Toys R Us, Kohl's, Modell's, and several small stores. The building is constructed on land, but the rear portion of it is on a pier over the water, and it's open underneath. So it's a concrete plank floor system, and when the tidal surge came in underneath of it, it had nowhere to go because it was constrained by the bulkhead and rose, and you'll see. There was minor wind damage to the facade and the vestibule, but the floor damage from the flood was interesting. We'll leave it at that. These are some pictures from inside the store. This is just debris that was left. This is 2 different floor planks. So the one on top was actually lifted up. And these are, you can see through to below. This hatch was like an access hatch that blew out in the under the water pressure. And these are just pieces of the floor. This is out over water, and the water came up with such force it just blew the floor apart, like you can see here. That's a close-up. This is the back of the building. This was the sidewalk right on the water. Some floor tile that are not where they started. This is just some damage to the flooring and racking. That's the view from the roof, just so you guys can locate yourself, looking back at the Verrazano Bridge and Staten Island on your left. And this was very, very close to that walkway I showed you on the water at the back of the building. And this antenna was completely intact. And I think this is the greatest illustration of the wind versus water damage from this storm. I mean, this thing was not tied down in any special way, and it was literally exposure D if you were to, classify it for ASCE 7 purposes. It was on the water with nothing but open water in front of it, and nothing. The antenna was untouched. So I don't know how well you can see this, but these floor panels on the right-hand side are significantly lifted and displaced from the floor panels on the left-hand side. But you see the size of those panels and can figure out how much they weigh. They were just lifted up and tossed around. Just some mud. There was mud and water fountains coming through the floor. As the water pressure came up, it found a way in. It shot like a geyser up to 25 feet, hit the ceiling, and left debris like this. That's the same picture, I think, or similar. Some water was still remaining. Okay, that was Caesars Bay. Now the Jersey Shore. My first trip down there, I had to meet the homeowner who had engaged me, and I had to meet him inland, and we had to go through 2 National Guard checkpoints in his car. He had to drive me in. I'd say the first time I was there was maybe a week after the storm. The roads were covered in sand. It looked like it had snowed and they hadn't plowed yet. There was no blacktop. Literally, the entire island was washed over with sand. And everyone that was able to get back in had emptied the entire contents of their house onto their front lawn. And it was just mounds and mounds of everything these people own just sitting on their front lawn. It was quite a depressing sight. The only good part of that is a good chunk of those people with second homes, and it wasn't, you know, they still had a place to live, and it wasn't all their stuff. This is the Mantoloking Bridge, which crosses over the bay. This is prior to Sandy, and this is the morning after. There was a new inlet that was created there. You guys may have seen this one on the news. This is still not 100% recovered. The bridge, obviously, and the roads and everything is rebuilt, and the beach is rebuilt, but this is all still sand here. There's no, the houses that were on the beach in this area have not been rebuilt. It's all, everything from the road, Route 35, which runs north and south here. I don't know, you can see the remnants of it, but everything from there to the beach is still undeveloped here. This was in Lavalette, which actually fared pretty well during this storm. They had a very nice dune system, and Lavalette and Ortley are pretty much contiguous, but Lavalette had very nice dunes and Ortley Beach didn't. Even though they're next to each other, Ortley Beach pretty much was decimated, and Lavalette had a little bit of flooding, no real wave action damage. But this is a side of a house, and the water line here went just up to below the first floor. They had no interior damage in this house, but the pressure as things were filling and draining had blown out underneath the footing. That's the footing. And I guess there was water pressure inside of this foundation that blew underneath the footing, washed all the soil out, and relieved itself by coming outside. But that was it. This house was pristine inside. The first floor looked like nothing happened. All right, this is up in Bay Head, which is just south of Point Pleasant. It's where the Barnegat Bay begins and the island / peninsula starts. This rock wall and these jetties had not been seen in 30 years. They were well buried under the sand. That's how much erosion there was on the beach. This is a house that was on piles, and you can see how much sand erosion had occurred underneath the house. This probably had a crawl space under it prior to the storm. That's a house on the beach that had significant damage. These are just some pictures. This is underneath. This was like the basement area, but you can see how high the sand and debris piled up underneath this one. Some damage to framing. A lot of this was from impacts. The next picture I'm going to show you is my all-time favorite. This house had a side room, probably like a three-season porch type of room that I guess they had a bookcase in, and the room was no longer after the storm, but this picture, well, you'll see, this picture was taken outside. The bookcase remained with all the books intact and is now hanging on the wall on the outside of the house, but the room that it was in is completely gone, nowhere to be seen. These are just more photos of that same house. That's looking out the front of the house towards the ocean. This is another location in Bay Head. This is a little lake, and you can see how high the water is. That stop sign is completely underwater. Ortley Beach is between Lavalette and Seaside Heights, and they had very inadequate dunes. That is not the case now. The entire Jersey Shore barrier island from Bay Head to the southern end of Long Beach Island has a continuous gigantic dune, along with massively expanded beach. This was only finished about 2 years ago, but it was an Army Corps of Engineers project, and there is a one continuous protection system along the whole coast now. Ortley Beach was destroyed. I was in every town from Keyport up on the Bay Shore down to Atlantic City, Cape May area, and the only town that was worse than Ortley Beach, I think, was Union Beach, which is up on the Bay Shore on Raritan Bay. And the only reason it was worse is that there was literally nothing left there. The entire town was just gone. Ortley Beach had 20% of the town maybe was left. 80% of it was just gone or destroyed or had to be torn down. These are just some photos. Now, one thing to remember, a lot of these houses you're looking at were not located in the places that they're in these pictures. They were a couple lots away. Some of the modulars held together very well, but literally moved 3-4 lots down the street. And there were some places where the modulars and the houses would just stack up against each other because they would get pushed until they formed a log jam, and then they would just settle there. This is the old boardwalk, which was only probably about 2 feet off the beach, and you can see how much erosion occurred. That different colored sand you see in the background, I don't know if you can see the excavating equipment, but that was the emergency dune that that was installed with just whatever they could get their hands on, just to put something in place, because everything was extremely vulnerable to further damage if another storm had come at this point. That's just the same area, and that's fire hydrant. So you can see what happened to the pavement and how much the elevation dropped based on that fire hydrant. Similar pictures in a similar area. This is what's left of the surf club. This piece of the building is actually still there now, but they're talking about this piece of land here, making it a public park. This was a pretty famous place called Joey Harrison Surf Club. It had been there forever, but the whole building was just gone, and they never rebuilt it. This one, I was called to look at the house with the green insulation on it. And as you can see, the neighbor impacted the house. The house with the green insulation on it was all block, and that's one of the reasons it survived. But this was an insurance dispute between, and this happened a lot, where you'd have 4 different policies here. You'd have the homeowners on each of these houses and the flood insurance on each of these houses. So the greenhouse homeowners and flood argued with each other whether it was wind or water damage. And then both of them argued with both of the insurances on the other house, because they said, well, it wasn't wind or water. It was the impact of the yellow house on the greenhouse that caused the damage. So the yellow house's insurance should pay for the greenhouse's damage. And this went on for years and years and years. And it was a nightmare for these people. Well, the significance of this picture is what's not in it. This photo, if it was taken before Sandy, would be nothing but houses on top of each other. The houses and lots at the Jersey Shore are on the land is a premium, obviously, and they're tightly packed. There's very little yards, so there's probably 30 houses that were in this picture that are just nowhere to be seen. No trace of them. No, nothing, just gone. This is the same spot, just looking from a different angle. These were 2 houses that impacted each other. Again, as you can see, the house on the right, that's not an addition. That's a house from somewhere else that landed on this one. There's a better view of it. So that's the beach. So this yellow house got impacted by waves, got knocked off its foundation, and collided into the white house. That is looking towards Seaside Heights, and that picture I'm sure you guys are familiar with. That's the Jetstar roller coaster that was on the end of Casino Pier, and it ended up in the ocean. This is a modular. This was a 1 or 2 year old beautiful modular house that remained intact. There was this cracking here is probably the only damage that was in this house. Problem was the house ended up 3 lots down from where it started. It was actually to the right of where that greenhouse is. And this is one of those situations where all the houses just kind of piled into each other. If you look to the left of this house, all that's left of that house is a roof. This one stayed intact, but moved 3 lots. And then I guess it caught the other houses that were coming down the street. That's the other side, the other block. As you can just see, there's, this was a house or 2 here. There's just a pile of debris right now. These just speak for themselves. Just, I'm hoping this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get pictures of this stuff. This was that modular house that stayed intact, and that's someone's couch that came through the window. Which, again, I hope this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see this stuff. That is a foundation for a house. This is the sill plate. If you see the anchor bolt in the sill plate, right below the center of the window pane, you can see an anchor bolt still attached into the foundation. And then the piece of wood, there's the sill plate, and the blocks are what's left of the foundation. This was a dispute about what caused the damage, whether it was wind or water. All right, this is Rahway, which is inland, as I said, but there is the Rahway River runs through here and flooded. So this is the kind of stuff that engineers in North Jersey were used. I wouldn't say the damage, but river flooding and designing for and dealing with river flooding is stuff that we had seen and done before. We have a lot of rivers in North Jersey, and some of them are notorious for flooding, but you typically get very slow moving water rising and falling very slowly. You have to design for buoyancy and scour and hydrostatic pressure, and that's about it. This was an extreme example of what happens when you have river flooding, though. This is a foundation wall that was totally fine and had no issues. And when you added the water pressure to the soil pressure, it collapsed the wall. It literally just caved in. I think I have an inside. Yeah, that's standing in front of the house at grade level, looking into the basement where the foundation wall was. So that's how quickly this condition went from a completely stable foundation wall to a total failure. There was no middle ground. Yeah, that's a better shot. You can see the side wall of the foundation that remains, and then the piece that's missing. And that's from inside looking out. So inland, we had a lot of visits to assess trees which had fallen on houses, but that's not unusual. I mean, we did a bunch of those a couple of weeks ago for ASCE. So we had a lot of neighborhoods in North Jersey from the 20s and 30s with very old big trees. So anytime there's a storm, we do get a lot of trees falling on houses. Okay, so the aftermath. I mean, the immediate aftermath, there was a lot of insurance issues. The flood insurance versus homeowners insurance, that was a big thing. I mean, it was almost the default position of each insurance to say the damage was caused by the other. water versus wind damage, that was another issue. The damage caused by adjacent houses was another issue. Damage amounts exceeding policy limits was another issue. A lot of these people had bare minimum flood coverage that was required by their mortgage, but you know, that wasn't enough to actually rebuild their house. And very few people were happy with the claim amounts. I mean, that's expected, but obviously when it's on such a big scale with so many problems, and the amount of suffering that a lot of these people went through, it really is magnified. So one of the biggest issues right up front was the lack of knowledge of architects and engineers in the area for dealing with something like this, both in assessing it and designing the replacement structures for flood loads. So as I said, we in the Sandy's going to be almost 9 years ago. So in the 10 years I was in business prior to that, we had maybe 3 projects that involved any kind of flooding, period. They were areas inland where, the river had a flood elevation assigned to it. So you had to design for, 2 feet of slowly rising, low velocity water just for buoyancy or something like that. And that was all the experience we had with flood design. There was some people coming up here from like the Carolinas and Florida, both engineers and contractors who had some experience with this stuff and knew the codes and the requirements, but the building departments didn't know any better than we did. And eventually it got to the point where the architects and engineers were explaining to the building departments what the code said. So that was one problem to overcome. And then we had a mess of people coming in from all over the place to take advantage of people, to sell them on construction or something and then take the money and run, or it was a mess. It was just chaos. There was an issue with the damage threshold where a lot of towns were requiring people, if the damage was over 50% of the value of the house, that they had to rebuild it. And then if they had to rebuild it, they had to rebuild it to modern standards, which in most cases meant either up on piles or on a raised foundation. And this became a huge issue with, number one, were you over that threshold or not? And number two, what was the flood elevation? We'll talk about that in a minute. And then number three, if the town was going to require you to build your house in a certain way, but your insurance policy that we just talked about was not enough to cover that, these people really found themselves in a very bad spot. And the guidance was constantly changing. They were talking about revising the flood map elevations, and that, like every foot of elevation, the amount of money that would cost the community and the individual people, and how it would affect people's lives, and how many people would not be able to move back into their house if they raised it another foot. It was a real tug of war, and there was proposed elevations and a lot of public comment and what was going to actually be adopted. So it was just years and years of absolute chaos. New Jersey and New York started recovery programs. New Jersey was called RREM, New York was Build It Back. And I will say that any sort of program that large, whether it's run by the government or privately run, is going to be problematic to implement on the scale that they wanted to implement it on. But both of these programs were not run well at all. Just the sheer volume of people that were in the programs, I think, caught everyone off guard, and the logistics of doing it. They really, and in the end, they helped a lot of people and got a lot of people's houses rebuilt, but caused a lot of more problems. I'll be diplomatic and leave it at that. All right. All right, so today, the Jersey Shore is almost completely recovered. There are still a few vacant lots here and there. You know, we did about a year and a half ago, my company, we like 2 or 3 times a year, we'll do a community service day. And a year and a half ago, we had done one for this, it's called SBP. They're out of Louisiana, but they basically help people get back in their houses after storms. And we did a project in Monmouth County for someone who was finishing their house to move back into it post Sandy. And this was 18 months ago. It took them that long to get their funding together, get the house raised. And then when we were there, they were literally like painting and carpeting and just getting ready to actually move back in. But that's like 6 years, 7 years from the storm. So the Jersey Shore as a whole has a completely different look. If you go to Ortley Beach today, on some of those streets where there was nothing, they're like canyons now, because all the houses are 3-story houses that are at least an additional story off the ground. So you went from a lot of bungalows and very low to the ground small houses to very high houses that it's coming down the street. It almost looks like a canyon, like that Manhattan effect of coming down the street with high buildings on each side. A lot of these people made out on this, though. I mean, there's people who had the right combination of insurance and grants and resources, and you know, property values have recovered, and they went from having a $300,000 bungalow to $1 million beautiful house. So, you know, for all the stories of heartache, there's a lot of people that ended up with something with a lot more value in the end. Occasionally, you'll see a bungalow or a vacant lot. It looks very weird. It's like the juxtaposition of the old Jersey Shore and the new Jersey Shore. Most of the bungalows that survived and are still there are either built entirely with block, or they had some sort of shielding, some sort of building or structure that survived that was between the bungalow and the ocean and shielded it from the waves. I don't know if you guys remember, but about a year after Sandy, there was a massive fire on the Seaside Heights Boardwalk that took out a whole nother portion of it. So between the fire and Sandy, the Seaside Heights Boardwalk is probably more than 50% completely redone from what it was before those events. The dunes and beach replenishment was just finished up, not last summer, the summer before that. But basically there was a continuous dune along the entire coast, and the beaches were basically where the dune ends on the ocean side now used to be the water line, and then we have a really wide beach out from there. So there's the first step in protection is the dunes and building the beach out. And the roads and utilities are all upgraded, except for the power lines. But all the sewers and water, everything underground, and the roadbed are all significantly upgraded from what they were. So that's a positive, I guess. So lessons learned. Dunes work. I can tell you the single biggest factor I saw in all these different towns on how bad the damage was what their dune system was like. So a lot of people complained when they put the dunes in. There was some lawsuits and some eminent domain issues, and some people saying they wanted to do their own dune system, or their property values were going to be diminished. And I, you know, I'm sensitive to a lot of that. But from a purely technical perspective, the dunes were the single thing that clearly made a difference town to town. You had towns next to each other like Lavalette and Ortley Beach and Seaside Heights and Seaside Park where one had dunes and the other didn't, and the towns with the dunes had minimal damage. Some light flooding, but no wave action. I mean, the wave action and the tidal surges would destroy the towns that got destroyed. So if you can hold that back, then you just have a rising and falling water issue. Piles and elevation protect the buildings. Obviously, that's the second part of this. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. The rest of this presentation, we're going to talk about some engineering and technical concepts and get you your PDHs. But the other thing that I think I learned more than anything is the power of Mother Nature, and there's nothing you can do other than what I said with the, put the dunes up and get the houses elevated. Other than that, whatever it wants to do, it's going to do. So, and you saw the new inlet that got cut, regardless of what dunes or elevation or piles or whatever you have there, it wouldn't matter in that scenario, because literally just it took the land away. And I think that the biggest lesson we learned from preparing and navigating the storm and the aftermath was everyone was used to preparing for these individual power and service outages. Like, I'm going to lose power, so I need to prepare my house in the following way. But as I said, in the prior storms, people had friends or had parents or had relatives, always were able to find someone that had power. And if yours didn't come back on in 2 days, you could go there. But when everyone lost power and services at the same time, nobody had anywhere to go for power. Nobody had anywhere to go for gas. That became a whole different scenario that I think we have to think about if and when there is a next one like this. All right. Now that was the fun stuff, you guys. Now we got to do some engineering now. Phil said I had to have some technical stuff so you get your CEUs. So, all right, we got about 20 minutes, I think, which is good. Or maybe we'll try to do this in 10 and leave 10 minutes for questions. You have any preference or?
I guess no preference.
Okay, well, let's see how it goes, and we'll take it from there. Just give me 1 second here.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So some of the things that I learned through my involvement with the RREM Build It Back program, as I said, we had to kind of learn this as we went, and we had to not only learn it, but in many cases we had to inform the building inspectors as to how all this worked, and we had to inform the people that were running these programs how this worked. And there was some disputes, not in bad faith, but we were all trying to figure out exactly how to interpret the codes, because there's some confusion. There's the IBC, the IRC, there's an SEI or ASCE standard for flood resistant design, and then there's a whole set of FEMA codes. And then I think there's also a coastal construction manual, which I thought was FEMA, but I don't think, I think that's the one of the wood groups that puts that one out. So obviously these are single family residences, so the IRC is usually applicable. But obviously the IBC can also be used, and they say different things in terms of some of the requirements for freeboard, which is you have your base flood elevation, and then you have to add a certain amount of freeboard to that. So these codes say different things, and they also say different things when you have wave action. And some of it says you have to have the bottom of the lowest structural member above that elevation, and others say just the floor has to be above that elevation. So then if you have a bunch of 2x10 floor joists that are now below the water line and subject to wave action, one code says you can do that, the other one says you can't, and you have to raise it up another foot. That's just an example of some of the conflicts. They're relatively minor, but there's a lot of those things where they say different things. But then they both reference the ASCE standard, which says some other things. So that was one of the problems we had. And then there's a whole set of FEMA standards and other things that are kind of guidelines, and they're not code adopted. So while that may be the right way to build stuff, technically there's no way to trace it back to an enforceable code. So that was one set of problems. Then the other is this V and coastal A zones, which are V zone is clearly defined as a V stands for velocity, and that is a flood zone where there's wave action. Obviously, rising and falling waters is just hydrostatic pressure, and that's it. But when you have wave action, that puts an impact onto things, and that makes a tremendous difference in the forces that a structure is going to see. There's also something called the coastal A zone, which is very loosely defined. It's not a V zone, but it's kind of a transition zone between an A zone, which is inland, and a V zone, which is subject to velocity. Coastal A zone still has wave action, but it's generally the requirements are a little less stringent. But anytime you have a V or a coastal A zone, you have to consider the wave action. The coastal A zones are very poorly defined on the flood maps. There's a line, you'll see the V zone, you'll see the A zone. There's a line that's supposed to be on the map called the limit, LIMWA, I think it is, limit of mean wave action or something. And it's usually a line with triangles on one side of it. So everything to the triangle side of that line that is in an A zone is considered a coastal A zone. But not all the maps have that line, and it's quite confusing. And a lot of the building inspectors had no idea what we were even talking about when we discussed these things with them. Elevation, height, and freeboard. There, as I said, there were all kinds of battles over what to set the base flood elevations at, and then your base flood elevation is just what is on the FEMA flood map. In addition to that, depending on what zone you're in, you have to add 1, 2, 3 feet of freeboard, which is either to just give you a little cushion or to allow for wave action. Because the waves are typically above the flood elevation is where the waves would occur. A lot of towns started adopting their own ordinances setting elevations, and a lot of them just went higher. So while if you followed the code strictly, you might have to do your base flood elevation plus 1 foot. A town might adopt an ordinance where everything has to be your base flood elevation plus 3 feet. And the people were still arguing about what the base flood elevation was and what map was going to be adopted. So this was very chaotic, because there were people who built houses on certain assumptions, and it turns out that their first floor was below the flood line once it was finally adopted, and now they can't get flood insurance. So we had a couple of those too. And there was a lot of issues with variances because you have conflicts. I mean, you have to have all your, one of the big ones that came up a lot was all of your utilities have to be elevated above the flood line. But the utility companies, PSE&G, JCP&L, they require that meters and all that stuff has to be at eye level from standing on grade. Their meter readers are not supposed to be climbing stairs. So that was something that had to be worked out. A lot of these houses, once they were raised, they violated height restriction requirements. So now you technically need a variance to just lift an existing house up. But the town's also telling you, you have no choice. You have to lift your house up because you exceeded the damage threshold. So that was another mess. So the dispute that I had with several people and eventually prevailed on is this wet versus dry floodproofing issue and how you design a foundation wall when you do not need to use piles. So all the V and coastal A zone houses, they have to go up on piles. That way there's no foundation wall to be broadsided by a wave. Any walls you have underneath have to be breakaway walls. And there's guidelines in some of these codes and standards on how you properly design a breakaway wall. So the point would be a wave would impact the wall would break away, the piles would remain, and the water would just flow around the piles below the house, and the house remains intact. Your bracing typically is rods or something with a very thin profile in order to minimize the amount of surface subject to having a wave impact it. If you had a foundation wall and it was impacted by a wave and fell over, then the house falls over. So that's the theory. So on the houses that are not subject to wave action, you can build block wall foundations, poured concrete foundations. Some people were putting helical piles or driven piles with grade beams on them at grade level and then building a block wall on top of it just to have protection against scour and erosion. But the code says you need to design for scour, erosion, hydrostatic, hydrodynamic. It gives a whole list of things and then very little specifics on how to do that. So it also says you need to, well, let me start with wet versus dry flood proofing. Then technically, if you're in an A zone, there's two ways to flood proof. There's wet flood proofing and dry flood proofing. Dry flood proofing means you're making the space watertight and designing it to not float. That's rarely, if ever, done. That would mean you would have a sealed basement, or not basement, ground level, sealed to water. No water can enter. But now what you've made is a boat when the water's there. I don't know if you guys have ever been involved with pool failures where the pressure relief valves at the bottom of the pool don't work and the pool floats out of the ground like a boat. Same thing would happen with the house. So nobody really picks that option unless there's a very good reason for it. So wet flood proofing allows all your living space and all your utilities and everything has to be up above the flood level, but you allow the water in and out. So you have flood vents. They're basically very similar to any kind of vent you'd have in a crawl space. You have to have a certain area open to allow, based on the volume of the crawl space, to allow water to come in and come out. But the code says you have to design for both filling and draining of that space. So I read that as you have to design for the condition where the flood rises outside, but it takes 10 minutes to go through the flood vents and fill the basement up. So you have a full height water pressure at the exterior and nothing on the inside. And then also the opposite the next day, where you have the basement filled up, but the flood height's going down and you have to drain it. So you have full height water on the inside and no water on the outside. So if you do that and you use a block wall, which everybody wanted to do because it's a lot cheaper, nobody wanted to use poured concrete. Now you have to put the rebar at the center of the wall so you can get some value for both directions. Poured concrete wall, obviously you could have rebar on either side and it becomes a much easier proposition. So now you have your rebar in the center of the wall where it's almost worthless. You just cut your wall thickness in half. So we developed charts and tables based on the height of the wall and what reinforcement you would need. And we were using 10 times the reinforcement that other people were using. I saw many of these go up with no reinforcement. I saw engineers and architects sign off on them too. No reinforcement. I saw, number 3 bars at 48. That probably wouldn't even work for the wind on a 10-foot high wall in a hurricane zone. And we had a little debate with the state and the people running these programs saying, this is how I'm interpreting this, and this is what I think needs to happen. And that's how we designed all these things. We put a lot of rebar in there and we put it in the center for that reason. And I believe that's the correct interpretation of it, but that might be something you guys might have opinions on. It might be a good discussion topic. So if I've confused you with all of this, then I've done a good job of expressing how confusing it was. If I could do 4 hours, like methodically going through all this stuff from top to bottom and kind of get it in a way where we could all wrap our heads around it. But obviously I don't have that time today. And my point was not to teach an engineering class. It was to explain some of the issues that occurred and why. And, just talking through this and bouncing around all these different things and should show you how confusing this was to everybody. But hopefully this was a once in a lifetime thing, and I'm not going to have an opportunity to take pictures like that again, or to have to debate the code officials as to what the code says. And hopefully we learned a lot of lessons from this and can put them to use in the future so we don't have these problems. So that is it for the slides. We did an hour of talking. We got another 5 or 10 minutes if you guys want to discuss anything or ask questions.
Yeah, so definitely seems like a good experience for you to have been involved in, and definitely seems like chaos in some respects.
Oh, it was. Yeah, everything about it was from what actually happened to figuring out how to put it back was nothing but chaos. So.
What I have to do for everybody to get their PDHs is I'm gonna put some polls on the screen now. You did send me them, and you sent me the answers, and I just added a couple, kind of bogus answers to kind of, set it up for everybody.
Right.
So let me start the first poll. So I just launched it. What was the issue that was not properly planned for prior to Sandy? So I'll give you guys a minute. So it looks like we're already at so let's see, end the poll, share the results. So everybody got that one right. So the next one. So the next one here, launched. How did the towns with dunes fare compared to towns without dunes? You guys are getting through this pretty quick. That's good. Okay, I'll end the poll. Yes, obviously significantly better. That's correct. Next poll, what was the main design concepts to protect against wave action flooding? I might have thrown you off by one of these, but let's see what you guys come up with. Okay, 24. Okay, so I'm gonna end the poll. Share the results. Yes, the answer was that the answer that Joe provided to me was the elevation above the water and pile foundations. Joe did talk a little bit about dunes, but the correct answer was the second one down there. Number 4, how are coastal A and V zones similar? Looks good. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. Share the results. Yes, so everybody, or most people got it correct. Wave action. And the last question, pretty easy. What was the damage from Sandy mostly related to, wind or water? Okay. I'm gonna end it here. Yeah, most people got it right here. You can see water was the main problem. Okay. So we only have a few minutes left. Does anybody have any, there's one question that Jeff asked in the comments here.
Yeah, which I think we covered. I mean, that
Yeah.
area is completely rebuilt. Certainly there's always the discussion when stuff like this happens, and New Jersey does have a program, green, blue something, where some of these neighborhoods that habitually flood, they're buying out the homeowners and tearing down the houses so they don't continually have to be restored. But those are more localized neighborhoods and river flooding. I think if any politician ever suggested de-developing the Jersey Shore, they would end up in the bay with cement shoes. So you guys are from New York, so you could appreciate somewhat of that joke.
Yes, yeah.
Colorado, I wouldn't have done that one.
There's another one just popped up down there.
Somewhat, yeah. Tim, the question is, with the code conflicts, did you find that the authority having jurisdiction worked with the design professionals to resolve the concerns? Somewhat. So they were just as confused as we were. You know, for the most part, everybody worked together, but you know, that definitely there were some conflicts that were a little more intense. And some of these variance things, you know, they were still going on a year or two ago. I had one in Manasquan where the house was raised and the peak of the roof was like a foot over the maximum height they were allowed, but there was issues because the woman was disabled and needed an elevator. So the basement had to be higher to have the elevator. So the whole ADA thing got thrown into it. And, you know, so some of them became contentious, but for the most part, everybody was just working together to get people back in their houses.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any?
Yeah,
any questions?
this is Larry Palesci. Joe, I really sympathize with your grief down there because I retired 3 years ago, and my biggest problem was I was working for an organization called GOZER, Governor's Office of Storm Recovery. And I can't say much about it because I signed a piece of paper saying that I wouldn't talk about it.
Fair enough.
A lot of what you're saying is very, very, very true.
Right.
Fortunately, in New York, a lot of this stuff was worked out by DEC as far as codes and construction and all that stuff. There are a couple of seminars that DEC puts on that are free and you can go to, and you can learn about how to design buildings for coastal and waterfront structures. And it's very good. It's long, but at least they got it all nailed down. So there's no arguing over this stuff. But
Well, now, correct, but years ago, not so much.
Well, they came out with that pretty quick, and it helped a lot. But it's like, you know, we talked about being leaders in our communities and stuff. Being an engineer down, I was working mainly on Long Island, all down the southern coast of Long Island. They don't want to hear from you. They don't want to see you. It's free money and it's lawyers.
Right.
up and
Right.
down the coast. You've got nothing to say.
Right.
You
Well,
know, it's unfortunate. And the biggest issue isn't really the storm. The south coast of Long Island is protected by Fire Island
Right.
for miles and miles and miles. It's great. The problem is when you get to be 180 years, 150-year-old buildings there, the water, ocean water has risen at a foot every century. So a lot of your substructure, your sewers, your storm drains, all of that doesn't work, period.
Right.
Whether there's whether it's Superstorm Sandy or not, your
Right.
roads are going underwater, everything's going to flood. And they have a very difficult time thinking that. You're right. When Mother Nature moves, when the ocean rises a foot, 14 inches, you lose.
Right.
There
Exactly.
is nothing you can do to help that.
Yeah. Yeah. We one accomplishment on this whole thing is we actually designed the first house that was raised under the New York Build It Back program in Garrettson Beach in Brooklyn. So you just reminded me of that when you were talking. That was the first one that actually went up physically. So after that, it was downhill.
So there was one question that popped up in the comment.
Yeah. Did the new base flood consider do? I don't believe so. That's a good question. I don't think that's related. I think the dunes are the dunes are built based on, you know, what the expected flood elevation is. I don't think you're allowed to, because if you have two storms back to back and one washes away the dunes and then the second one comes and that's not an implausible situation. You know, the houses still should be protected. I think the dunes are almost sacrificial. They're you know, they're meant to be your first line of defense and get washed away in a bad storm and then save all the property. But then what happens after that? It's going to take a while to rebuild them. So if somebody knows that answer better than I do, but that's my belief. So.
Cool. Anybody else? No? Okay. Well, Joe, it's been a pleasure. I know you're trying to run your own business and you're president now and you're a busy guy. So it's great that you were able to speak with us today.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss you. I mean, we've been 8 months. We've been back and forth on this thing between could I do it? Was it in person? Was it virtual? Did I have it ready? So stay in touch. Anything you guys need at your local chapter, just let me know and I'll get it to the right person.
Are you talking tomorrow and the next day at the leadership?
I am. Yeah, I have a pre-recorded message, and then I'm participating in some question and answers. So it's a small piece of it, but I do have something to do. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Jack is our chair now. He was just sworn in today, and he'll be in attendance to that. So yeah.
See you tomorrow, Jack.
Yep. Sounds good.
With that, everybody, thank you for being with us today. One last